Right-wing radio talk show host Alex Jones, who runs INFOWARS, has been suspended from Twitter for making controversial comments against the media and Antifa. The social media outlet is just the latest tech giant to shut him down. Joining me now with the latest, Fox News chief national correspondent Ed Henry. What's going on here?
It's a very interesting story because you mentioned these tech giants in the private sector. They had already been targeting Alex Jones. You got Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter blocking video, audio content, even Apple kicking his podcast out of the iTunes store. But all of that picked up steam this week when the government decided to jump in as well. You had the Federal Communications Commission shutting down his Liberty Radio and slapping it with a $15,000 fine. The chair of the FCC testified before a Senate panel and said that the station has been operating without a license since at least 2013 and that this was not about policing speech. It was about enforcing the law for pirate radio stations like the one that Jones was running. Now, Twitter chief executive Jack Dorsey, he says that it was in accordance with their normal rules that they put him on what they're calling a Twitter timeout for posting a video that was offensive. Bottom line is, for Alex Jones, he is saying that he has a conspiracy theory about why everyone's coming after him. He says it may be a false flag to distract from what he calls the big event, some sort of civil unrest or the assassination of President Trump. That shows you why Jones is an easy mark. He comes up with these conspiracy theories, so that's why the private sector's been targeting him, the government as well, but it's a slippery slope. Does this open the door to others on the left and the right potentially being targeted, being sidelined? You might not like what he has to say, but it's him today. Is it somebody at Fox or somewhere else tomorrow? We
know what he said about the Sandy Hook massacre, that it was some conspiracy theory, and that's reprehensible.
That basically the kids were not murdered. That
right.
And their parents are very... To say that they're upset about that would be the understatement of the century.
Of course. So was there something new specifically that he's been saying recently on the airwaves or on Twitter that's now brought the hammer down on him?
There was specifically a video recently where he was talking about pick up your battle rifles that basically were going to go after the media. And I think that's why Twitter and some of the other platforms said this may be inciting violence. This may be crossing a line.
Has this ever happened before to anybody?
So we did a lot of research on people who have been knocked off Twitter, other platforms, and we couldn't find someone with a following like this. Are there cases where somebody with 50 followers, 100 followers has been kicked off because they post something offensive, inciting violence? Yes, of course. There are plenty of those, but not someone who has, the thousands and thousands of followers that INFOWARS has.
Right. All right. Well, also a huge media story this week. I believe 380 editorials all came together and wrote a response to President Trump calling them fake news, the enemy of the people. Now, and if 380 editorials come out criticizing Trump, how is that different than any other day?
Well, that's a good point, which is that there were some in the White House agitated about it, but Kellyanne Conway said, why? These editorial pages, they rail against the president every single day.
Right.
And by the way, it's more than that. It bleeds into the news pages. That's really the story. That's what the president's targeting, not editorial pages. Fox has editorials. Fox has op-eds, essentially. When Sean Hannity comes on, the primetime shows, people have opinion, people have edge. We make that distinction. So the New York Times can have a liberal editorial page. The Wall Street Journal can have a conservative editorial page. I think what clearly frustrates the president more is that editorial position on any given issue bleeds oftentimes into the news pages. And another important distinction, when the president first tweeted about the enemy of the American people months and months ago, he said fake news was the enemy of the American people. That's different than saying
a big distinction.
The entire media.
And I know what he's saying because these newspaper editors and the pundits and all of these correspondents were not tough against President Obama. They did the president's bidding back then. So they'd have a lot more credibility when they say now, oh, you know what, we're just being honest journalists, we're trying to hold powerful people accountable. They don't have a leg to stand on that issue. He's saying they're the enemy because for the last year and a half, they've called him the enemy. They've called him the enemy of the Constitution, of minorities, of the rule of law, and he's a counterpuncher. He hits back and he says the fake news is the enemy of the people because the fake news isn't telling the American people the truth. They're biased, they're slanted, and they're denying the people the right information. They're not reporting the good things he does. They're not giving him any credit for the good things. They're just not fair and balanced.
And I hear you say that a lot about the counterpunching. When people complain about the president's tweets, oh, he attacked someone, oftentimes somebody attacks him.
It's not out of the blue.
He goes back and says, look, I'm not going to take this.
Right.
And a lot of his supporters obviously love that, especially when he's taking on the mainstream media. Here's the final point I'd make on that, though. I don't think a lot of conservatives can complain and whine about editorial pages speaking out. They have First Amendment rights, too. And so if the president can counterpunch,
right, people
in the media have every right to push back,
right,
especially on the editorial pages.
They can dish it back, but they can't take it. All right, Ed Henry.